Hello, everyone. Welcome to a video presentation on best quantitative research practices. So this is actually part of a four-part series covering the research process, writing and publishing, recommended tools, as well as hosting reading groups. So for this video today, I'll be looking at the research process. But if you're interested in seeing these other videos, please remember to check our YouTube channel. So for the research process, I've divided things up as follows. I'll start by giving some advice and tips on the literature review. Then once you have the literature review set, how do you actually set up a very good research question? Next, I will look at how to write a good research proposal. And finally, once all these things are done, I will give some tips on performing research where you try and answer your research question. I'll then end with my conclusion as well as some references. So for the research process, suppose there is a field that you are very interested in, you want to explore it further and possibly contribute to results from your side or your team side. So of course, you're going to start with a literature review of the field. Literature is published in research journals, typically by academics or industry experts. So two examples of good research journals is the Journal of Portfolio Management or the Journal of Financial Data Science, which we at Hudson and Thames really enjoy. Now, there's some important things to keep in mind here, especially if this is your first entry into quantitative research. And the most important thing being the quality of the journal that you're looking at. So journals are measured in terms of quality, in terms of a metric such as the impact factor, which is perhaps the most common. And the impact factor, generally, the higher it is, the better the quality of journal. Another way of looking at the quality of the journal is the type of researchers that you see publishing in these journals. Perhaps you know some of the very big figures and icons in the research field, and typically they will publish in very high quality journals. So a good saying to keep in mind here is garbage in, garbage out. At the end of the day, you don't want your research to be based on poor quality research. Poor quality research journals have lower standards and may end up publishing poor quality research. Basing your research results on this could lead to incorrect or poorly motivated conclusions or erroneous quantitative results. Always go for the highest quality journals, at least as best as you can. So let me go into a bit more detail. Once you have found some high quality journals, where do you actually start with a literature review? So if you're very new to a field, I would highly recommend looking at review papers. So this is often written by the experts in the field, which will give a good level overview of the current topics in the field and the past things that have been discovered. Even if you're not new to the field, if you're an experienced researcher, there's still great papers to refer back to. But otherwise, you want to be looking at the latest state-of-the-art papers in the field. So this is the frontier research where there are open questions that people are trying to answer. And possibly this is also where you will be able to contribute. A thing that I would also like to mention is landmark papers. So these are historical big papers that have been published in the field that serve kind of as signposts in the broader scheme of things. So typically from these papers, many years of research is generated. They're typically characterized by very high citation counts. So if I just take a very simple example, the Black Scholes paper, the famous one on options pricing, at the time of this video, currently sits at about 43,500 citations. which is a lot. And of course, it has had a very big impact in its field. So these are good papers to understand. They give a broader picture and context for the current latest state-of-the-art papers that you may be looking at. So if you've completed your literature review successfully, and note this may take some time, many months, perhaps even more than a year, you might have noticed key areas where there is potential for research that you or your team could answer and publish, or could have a good impact on a portfolio that you are managing, for example. So now you want to maybe continue with this research. So the next step is to set up a research question. So a research question should be well constructed, firstly. It shouldn't have any ambiguity or vagueness to it. If I can present maybe a picture, think of yourself as going into a room of fellow quantitative researchers or quantitative analysts or any other quantitative finance experts. And if you present to them your research question, they should know exactly what you are trying to answer. Every term in your research question should be well defined and well understood. There shouldn't be any ambiguity or two people having two very different pictures of a term that is used in your research question. Everyone should understand the terms in your research question. Also, it should be well fleshed out. It should capture or potentially be able to capture deep and subtle aspects of the research topic that you're trying to look at. So this is where most of the interesting things are happening. So to make things a bit more concrete, let's look at two quick examples. And on the left-hand side, I have an example of a correct, well-formulated research question. And on the right-hand side, I have an incorrect or a poorly formulated research question, I should say. So let's start with the wrong way, perhaps first. Has pairs trading been profitable in the last 5 years? So this question doesn't have anything inherently wrong with it. The problem is that it is too simple. It is an example of a yes/no type question. So the problem with these type of questions is that they potentially fail to capture very deep and interesting things in the field that you are trying to study. And missing out or glossing over this could lose some years of research, potential future research, and may actually be a waste of time. So it doesn't have enough specifics, perhaps, to capture detailed aspects of the research. So the question on the left-hand side, you will immediately notice is more fleshed out and also starts with a how instead of has. So this question, you cannot answer with a yes/no type answer, but that's a good thing. You want to really get under the skin of the topic that you're looking at and uncover some of these very deep potential connections that you could see. And this type of question will be better able to capture that. So how has high frequency trading affected the popular approach to pairs trading on US listed equities in the last 5 years? Note also that this question, and in fact, the last question, is very clear. Again, in my analogy where you are in a room with fellow researchers and you present to them this question, all these terms should be very well understood by everyone. It should be very clear what you are trying to answer. Okay. So supposing now that you have set up your research question correctly, it's well fleshed out, it's a good research question that's going to fill the next maybe 2-3 years of your research, you want to first write a research proposal. So a research proposal is a document that sets out a plan of what you're trying to answer, some of the background motivation for why you are trying to answer this, and also how you are going to go about answering this question. The diagram on the right shows a general broad structure for how you would write the research proposal, but depending on the field that you are in, you might find some deviations to the structure, but this should at least get you going. So you will, of course, start with a title for your research proposal. And similar to the research question, this should capture some of the deep, it should be clear and well-defined. And, if anyone reads it, they should be able to get a good grasp of the topic that you are looking at. Next, you will write an introduction section. So the introduction section will arguably be the most technical part of your research proposal and will mostly come from the literature review that you have performed. In this section, you basically want to paint a good picture of the current state of the field and how your research question is going to fit into that, and also motivate your research question, right? There should be a good reason why you're trying to answer your question. So next, you're going to state your research question, also sometimes referred to as a hypothesis, by the way. And as I've discussed, it should be a well-defined, well-fleshed out question. Then you will write a section on your methodology. And this is basically your plan in terms of how you are going to answer your research question. If it is, for example, a very data intensive question where you need to collect a lot of data, you need to clean it, you will perhaps include those kind of aspects. How are you going to go about collecting this data, the cleaning process, what kind of methods are you going to use? And similar for maybe other aspects of the research question. And finally, you should supply your references at the very end. The reference section shouldn't be very bloated. It should just be sufficient to cover well, mostly things from your introduction, since that's where most of your references are going to be used. And it should also capture the key papers that motivates your research question. So once you've written your research proposal, you are ready to jump into it and answer your research question. And answering the research question with the methodologies that you use, whether they are going to work, well, they should work, since you've probably thought very carefully about it. But answering a research question tends to be a bit of an art, depending on how good of an eye you have for detail and coming up with good strategies to answer technical questions. But nonetheless, there are some good tips that I can give you that should help on your journey to answering your research question. So let's start with this one. Enforce a good level of rigor. Always when you're doing research, be rigorous. There's a well-known saying or quote, which goes as follows: rigor cleans the window through which intuition shines. If things are clear and well-defined, you have less chance of coming up with, well, ill-defined answers that may end up leading to erroneous results. Always practice a good level of rigor. And when I also say rigor, I don't mean at the level of a mathematician where you are proving every statement in deep detail. There's a good level to be found in terms of rigor, which you can probably find in any of the research journals that you're looking at to get an idea. Next, always be skeptical of your results. Any new result that you find, you should check in a lot of detail. There may be, for example, special test cases which you can check to see if your result returns these special test cases. So for example, you could have generalized someone else's result. And in that sense, it should, for some very special test cases, reduce to that person's result, which is a good check. And there are various other checks that you can do. Maybe get some of your peers also to check and confirm if they agree with your results, which kind of leads me to the next point. Reach out to the experts in your field for comments. So your research question is probably based on some very important research papers in your field where you've identified some key researchers. I would encourage you to reach out to them, maybe share with them some of your results, so that they can comment on it. If there is something wrong with it, given that they know their field so well, it is likely that they'll be able to see some aspect of it that you may be missing, or can identify some cases where you may not be aware that your results, well, might not apply very well. And then a final very quick tip, market your results at key conferences. So you will probably have seen some important conferences where the experts in your field presents their results. Try to get into these conferences and present your results as well. It opens your results for further critique, but also for further discussion with fellow researchers. And this is a good thing because often in these discussions at conferences, new ideas are formed between you and other researchers, which could lead to interesting extra years or papers of research. So with that, I'd like to present my conclusion for this presentation. I covered 4 aspects of the research process, being the literature review, setting up a good research question, writing a good research proposal, and some tips on performing research where you're trying to answer your research question. There's many details more about this on the internet, which I would encourage you to look up and read more about. And I will present here my references as well, in case you are interested in me reading up more in terms of the points that I've specifically brought up in this presentation. So with that, I'd like to close my presentation. I thank you for your time. And if you have found this presentation very interesting and would like to see more, I would highly encourage you to visit our YouTube channel and even subscribe. Thank you.